Hey guys, it's Jasma, and today we're going to make walnut biscuits. This is a traditional Chinese cookie that my mom made when she was a child. It's really crunchy and crispy, and it kind of just melts right in your mouth. There are lots of walnuts in here, and I added a little more than the traditional kind would have, just to make it a little healthier and have a little more flavor. I changed the recipe up a little bit so it's kind of different from the traditional recipe, and I'm using my own methods to make it today. So let's get started. First, make sure to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to sift together the dry ingredients. I have a hand sifter here, and I'm just going to add in the all-purpose flour. Then we're going to pour in the salt, baking soda, and the baking powder. I like to mix it up a little bit before I sift it through because I find that sifting does help mix the ingredients together, but it doesn't mix together all the way. So I still like to just do a little extra step there. And just sift everything through. Make sure you don't skip this step because it adds quite a bit of air into the cookies. Next, we're going to mix the walnuts into the flour. Now, I chop these up a little bit coarser than the traditional kind. You could also beat it up in a food processor into a powder. And if you want to, you can toast these in the oven or on the pan a little bit before you mix these into the cookies to make it smell nicer. I'm just going to leave it the way that it is and mix it into the flour. I'm using lots of walnuts here today, way more than the traditional recipe would have, because I like to make it a little healthier, and I want to actually be able to taste the walnuts inside of the cookies. So I'm just going to mix this through now, and I find that mixing it into the dry ingredients will help distribute the walnuts a lot easier in the cookie dough. For the wet ingredients, I'm using two types of fats today, unsalted butter and oil. Now usually the traditional kind would be made from lard, pig fat, but my family usually doesn't eat lard, so we don't really have it around the house. So I substituted that with oil and butter, and it works pretty well. The reason why we're using butter here is because if you just use oil in the cookies, then it would be really hard to bring the dough together because it becomes really crumbly and you won't really be able to shape it as well. So I'm using half butter and half oil. The butter kind of just helps bring the dough together because it's really creamy. So I'm going to start off by beating the unsalted butter using a hand mixer. You can also use a stand mixer until it's nice and pale and fluffy. Make sure you're using nice and soft butter. You can see I could cut through this nice and easily. Just sit it out at room temperature for a while and it will soften by itself. Pour this into a bowl and I'm going to start beating this just until it's nice and fluffy. The butter got a little paler in color and now I'm going to add in the oil. I'm using corn oil today. You could just use any flavorless and colorless oil. Pour in the oil. I'm going to mix the butter into the oil a little bit with my spatula first so that the oil doesn't splatter everywhere. I'm just pressing it down to break it up. I'm going to start mixing. Add in the sugar now. And just mix that through. Scrape down the bowl. See, this is a really runny mixture, but don't worry. It is supposed to be like that. Now we add in the egg. I like to break up the yolks. That's it with our wet ingredients. You can see it is kind of thick, nice and pale in color, and really glossy. So now we can combine the wet ingredients with the dry ingredients. I'm just going to pour it all in. And I'm going to mix this through by hand with my spatula because you do not want to overmix the dough. You see it comes together nice and easily just like a regular dough because we added in the butter. But you cannot skip on the oil either, so you make sure you add in both. Just mix until everything is perfectly combined, and this should be quite sticky. I prepared a baking tray lined with parchment paper, as always, and I'm using my handy-dandy little ice cream scoop to scoop out the cookies. And you do want to leave quite a bit of space between each one because they do spread a little. By scooping out the dough onto the baking tray, then roll it into a nice smooth ball. Then create a hole at the center of each cookie with your finger, pressing about halfway through, and this just creates a little area for the walnuts to sit in. Before we bake the cookies, you want to let it sit on the counter just the way that it is now for 15 to 20 minutes. And this just allows the cookies to soften a little bit and the texture will be a lot better after it bakes. Now we're going to bake these in an oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 13 minutes. And the bake time will vary depending on the size of your cookies and your oven. So just bake them until they're nice and golden brown on top, and you should be able to lick them off the baking tray without anything sticking. I made my cookies around 20 grams each, so I'm going to bake it off for around 10 minutes. That's how you make walnut biscuits. I made 40 today, but that will depend on the size that you make them. They're very crispy and crunchy and melt basically right in your mouth. I added a lot of walnuts here today just to make it a little healthier and add a lot of flavor to it. Once the cookies has cooled slightly in its tray, you want to place it onto a cooling rack for it to cool down completely before you store it in an airtight container. And you can't store it at room temperature. I feel like that would just keep it nice and soft, and because if you put it in the fridge, the butter would harden, and I don't really like the texture of that. So really hope you could try these cookies out. Thanks for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye!